Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of The Economist, where we discuss the multifold social, political, and especially economic issues that are present and very much evident in the world that we live in today. Now, it is mandatory that the first 5 minutes of our new podcast is dedicated to kind of resolving questions and comments that came up from the previous episode. But fortunately for us today, we do not have to do any of that because we did not get any feedback or questions regarding the Saudi Gasha. So we will dive straight into our topic for today, which is, drumroll please guys, which is Ghana and the IMF, making a success out of failure. So before we begin, I would just like to touch base on Ghana. So Ghana, formerly known as the Gold Coast, was the first black African or sub-Saharan nation to gain independence in 1957. Rich in resources such as gold and cocoa, its economy has seen both economic growth as well as challenges. From political reforms to economic stability, Ghana has made strides in sectors like agriculture, mining, services, aiming for sustainable development and attracting foreign investment. So, Susan, before we dive into our main segment, which is the Q&A session of this episode, why don't you enlighten us as well as the audience on what exactly this making a success in making a failure into success really is all about? Would you care to enlighten us? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the lovely introduction, Phyllis. So this article covers how Ghana relies on loans from the IMF to sustain their economy. It covers Ghana's current economic state, how the citizens of Ghana are coping, and the government's view on their current state. So it goes in depth on how Ghana relies on the IMF and what they do with the money that they acquire from the IMF and how this money takes away from their GDP.
So basically, what this episode is about is Ghana's continuous aid or funding by the IMF when its economy is on the verge of collapsing. They seek funding from the IMF, who continuously provides these loans to help resuscitate or revive their economy. That's basically what we are covering. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Lydia, would you care to add on, or should we go straight into our Q&A?
Just a brief history of Ghana's economy. Ghana's economy was growing at 8%, the fastest in the world in 2019. And in 2020, around July, it all came crashing down, and prices have skyrocketed to 50%, and unemployment rate has also increased. And this set the stage for Ghana's disaster.
Okay, thank you. So now that we are, fairly educated on this making a success out of failure, the first question that I have is, what specific macroeconomic issues is Ghana currently facing?
So currently they're facing inflation in general, and that covers increased interest rates and increased cost of living and all that good stuff.
Their foreign currencies have also decreased. They have less reserve in the banks, and as Susan mentioned, that it has affected the country's inflation rate and making it to increase.
So this inflation rate is increasing, meaning that cost of living for the citizens of Ghana is also increasing.
Most definitely.
Most definitely. So with all of these macroeconomic issues Ghana is facing, who would you say is being affected by inflation, unemployment, all these other issues? which party in Ghana is being affected? Is it the citizens? Is it the government? Is it the country as a whole? Or who is mainly affected by this macroeconomic issues?
Well, overall, all Ghanaians are affected by this, but more specifically, the working poor and the middle class people of Ghana. Like the working poor, like that refers to people like street sellers, like vendors, yam sellers, people that sell their produce and stuff like that.
And does this have an impact on the government eventually, or is it just the citizens that are suffering and the government does not play a part in this suffering?
Eventually, the government is also affected because one way or the other, the government depends on its people, like through collecting of tax. So if the people are suffering, that means the government is suffering, and it also reflects the economy as a whole, and overall the whole country is suffering.
Thank you. Very well answered. So the next question before we move to our Econ Bite, we will get to that. But the next question is there a hidden motive behind the IMF's continuous funding of Ghana? Is there something that we, the general public, do not know that what's happening? Is there like a relationship? Because according to the article, it says that Ghana has already sought 17 loans from the IMF. So would one of you care to enlighten us if there is a hidden motive, or if the IMF simply just wants to carry out its job to help provide stability in economies of the world? Would either one of you would be fine?
Well, overall, they are playing their role to promote global macroeconomic activity and financial stability throughout the world. That's their main role as a body of the UN that they play. But from my perspective, in my personal opinion, I feel like they have an ulterior power motive. So it's a way for them to have power over these smaller, less developed countries, so that overall the UN and like the countries that donate more to the UN and they have like more of a control over the UN. They sort of have control over and influence over these countries.
When it comes to important decision making,
Yeah.
is that what you...
Important global decision making, yes.
Got it. Okay, so now it is time for our Econ Bite, which is basically a mini part to the main segment where we inform the audience about the many happenings around the world and in Papua New Guinea, because that is where we are based. But we basically keep our audience informed of everything that is going on throughout the world. So Lydia will do the honors of updating us about Papua New Guinea's current economic issues. That is after Susan tells us a bit more about Congo. So Susan, would you care to go ahead and tell us about Congo?
Yes. So in Congo, I'm not sure if you guys are aware or not, but there is a genocide that is currently happening. The people are being killed off by the military forces of Rwanda and Uganda and other neighboring countries whom they, I can't really remember quite correctly, but they want control over Congo's resources, because Congo has a plethora of just important resources that power like our everyday things like phones, the silicone, and like all the little lithium, everything, the small stuff inside of that, you find it in Congo. So they want to, control that. So they're just wiping out and killing all these people as a way to enforce their military control over the region. It's really sad stuff. Children are being sold in bags. Women are being just sexually assaulted as a way of control and dominance. People are being killed off. Sad stuff.
I mean, it's not just in Congo. You have the same thing happening for Israel and Palestine.
Yes.
And it's happening all over the world. It's just some of these places do not have light shed on them yet, so people are not exposed to what's happening. But it's really sad to see the world come to this. Hopefully there will be repercussions for these these people that are,
Treated.
just violent and trying to spread so much hate and violence and war and crime. But thank you, Susan. That is on Congo. Lydia, do you want to talk about Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, so recently I've seen in the news that Papua New Guinea's the exchange rate has dropped drastically compared to the US, and they said that our 100 kina is like equivalent to US $26.
$26.
$26. But they also made mention it was actually supposed to be one kina was equivalent to 26 cent, but then I think the reporter made a mistake and then also stated that 100 kina was equivalent to 26 cent. So yeah, Papua
So
New
do you
Guinea.
think that was an honest mistake on the reporter's part, or was he trying to have some propaganda going, people talking about it to actually bring about some change, or was it an honest mistake from the reporter?
I mean, I've not seen any apologies yet. If it was an honest mistake, they would own up to it. But I think it was just propaganda, like
To get the
yeah,
people to talk about
talk
it,
about
and
it,
then
yeah.
when they're talking, actual change might come about.
Yes.
That's basically it.
That's it.
Okay, so that is the end of our Econ Bite. We only have 2 facts for today, but if you happen to join our next podcast, then we'll have more facts which will keep you informed and stay in the loop. So back to our main segment. Our next question is, why is it considered a success when Ghana is heavily in debt? Why do they make it seem like it's successful when, like in the article, it mentions that 80% of their GDP is set aside to be used to pay back the loans that they owe IMF. So why do they consider it a success when it is in fact, it appears to be a failure? Would any of you guys care to answer?
Well, I think there's a fine line that we have to thread when it comes to labeling it as a success. It's more of like a success and a failure. Like we have a neutral stance on this.
Yeah.
We agreed on that beforehand, and it could be considered a success because of the production in the economy, and most of the loans that the IMF does give them, they inject it back into the economy, and they invested back into the economy by building schools, roads, hospitals, etc. So it really boosts the economic growth for a while. But they're running on an deficit and expansionary budget. So they're spending more than they have, basically.
So just adding on to that, it can also be considered a success because the government also came up with this policy where they do one district, one factory. So during 2023, they have built over 126 factories so far, and railways connecting the country's districts. So that can be a success because the government, like Susan has mentioned, is injecting back to the economy.
So in a sense, the loans can be viewed as a success because, like you said, it's injected back into the economy, but it's also deemed as a failure because it's injected into the economy and then it has to be taken out again to pay this loans. So it can be 50-50, both success and failure.
Ghana in general, like the way they generate most of their GDP, it's sort of volatile. They don't really collect much tax from their people. I think tax makes up 12% of their GDP only. And the exports that they export, like cocoa, gold, all that, they're very volatile, meaning that like you can't really always generate profit because it depends on the prices on the market. So they sort of struggle with making money, but then most of that money goes into paying back the loan. So they get a loan again, and then they inject it back into the economy.
How would you describe the lives of the citizens? Because Ghana is ranked, according to sources, Ghana is ranked 53 three as world's poorest countries in 2024 with a GDP per capita of $7,156. So do you think that the people are living impoverished lifestyles, or are they somewhere in the middle of impoverished and well off in a sense?
I honestly think that depends on your class, which status you are in life. If you're at the bottom of the barrel, it's gonna be much more difficult for you. If you're up here, you're gonna be a bit fine. Generally, though they are struggling, Ghana has the highest GDP per capita in comparison with the rest of its West African countries. So
In
that's
the region.
in the region, yeah.
Okay. So our final and last question is that what similarities does Ghana share with other developing nations, particularly Papua New Guinea? What similarities do they share? And what recommendations do you have for these developing nations to help boost their economy without having to rely on loans from the IMF and loans from other foreign investments?
So the similarities Ghana has with PNG, the first one can be inflation, high cost of living. In PNG currently we're also facing inflation, and there is a high rate of unemployment as well. Many of our Papua New Guinean citizens are not employed, and it's just a minority that are being employed, and it's sad to see our Papua New Guineans are just off the streets of this nation, not being employed, and that are some similarities that Ghana has with Papua New Guinea.
Susan, do you want to add any more, or?
One thing I find interesting is that our governments deal with corruption the same way. So they're both corrupt in there, you know. I think they have the strategy that we do. Like when it's time for elections, they go around splashing big amounts of money, more than they have really, to promote themselves. And then, you know, when they get the position, they just disappear. And something that I find really funny is that the finance minister, he kept condemning the IMF and saying and blaming it like their, you know, problems and challenges on all these kinds of reasons, running back to racism and like all that, you know. But like it's really just poor government. It's a poor
And now
government.
this finance minister is being not targeted, I would say, but the people of Ghana are angry at him and upset. And you have an example in the article where this yam seller, she is saying that if she finds him, she catches him, she will belt him. So it really goes back to the government themselves, because they are the ones making these decisions, which in turn affect the population. So really, the government should also step up its decision making. Probably alternate between different choices before making the final say, which will affect the population in the future and in present. So that is it actually. No, that is not it. We still have our recommendations or the resolutions we have for countries similar to Ghana and also Ghana itself. So I'll start. So I have one which I put down: improve education and healthcare. This basically enhances human capital and then in turn increases productivity of the nation, and that can contribute to their GDP and overall economic growth. So we have one and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, the government could, as a way to boost the income expenditure that they produce, they could invest more in their small, medium enterprises. This is a really good way to get your economy going, because not only do you have businesses that are paying tax, they also employ people. So it just create more job opportunities. They pay tax. So a really good way to get your economy going.
And the last one, government can increase their export. They can increase export by selling finished products. Instead of selling raw materials, they can turn them into finished products like oil, refined, and then other
So
nations.
they're not just benefited from the raw material, but also the finished product. So that is our suggestions to developing countries, including Ghana itself and Papua New Guinea. That brings us to the end of our Economist podcast episode for today. Next week we will look at the IMF again, but with Tonga. So thank you very much for tuning in. If you have any questions or suggestions or feedback, just leave it in the comment section and we will address it first 5 minutes of our next episode. Thank you again. I am your host, Phyllis Biama, and these are my co-hosts, Susan, Warp. Thank you. Thank you very much, and that is the end.